quit my job to raise my stepdaughter and loved her like my own. Then she publicly announced at her party that my husband was cheating on me for months and she supported them. I, 40F, met my husband James, 42M, when his daughter Ellie was 7 years old. Her mother had passed away when she was 5, and James was struggling to balance his job as a construction supervisor with raising a young child. When we first met at a mutual friend's housewarming party, he seemed exhausted but devoted to his daughter. Ellie was clinging to his leg the entire evening, shy around the crowd of adults. I offered her some of the dessert I had brought, and she slowly opened up. After that initial meeting, James asked for my number. Our first date was at a family-friendly restaurant where Ellie could come along. I remember thinking how unusual it was to have a child on a first date, but now I understand James was testing how I would interact with his daughter. When I immediately connected with Ellie, he seemed relieved. She was quiet but smart, loved to draw, and clearly needed a mother figure in her life. Over the next few months, we went on more family dates than romantic ones. James would invite me to Ellie's school plays, soccer games, and even parent-teacher conferences. I didn't mind, I had always wanted children, and Ellie's serious little face would light up whenever she saw me in the audience. 6 months after we started dating, James asked me to move in with them. Their house was modest but homey. I left my apartment and my job as a middle school English teacher to help raise Ellie. The school where I taught was an hour away from James' house, and the commute would have been impossible while caring for a young child. Instead, I found part-time work, which paid less but gave me flexibility to be there for Ellie. James worked long hours as a construction supervisor, often leaving before dawn and returning after Ellie's bedtime. I was the one who packed Ellie's lunches with little notes tucked inside, helped with multiplication tables and spelling tests, attended parent-teacher conferences, and nursed her through stomach flus and ear infections. I taught her how to braid her hair and how to stand up to the girls who were mean to her at school. When Ellie was 8, she started calling me Mom instead of my first name. The first time it happened, I froze, unsure how James would react. But he just smiled and later told me he was glad Ellie had found someone to fill that role. James and I got married when Ellie was 9. We had a small ceremony in our backyard, with just family and close friends. Ellie was our flower girl and told everyone at the wedding that she was getting a real mom now. My parents, who had been skeptical about me marrying a man with a child, finally warmed up to James after seeing how happy the three of us were together. For 15 years, I dedicated myself to our family. I never tried to replace her biological mother. We visited her grave every year on her birthday, and I encouraged Ellie to keep a journal of things she would want to tell her mom if she were still here. On Ellie's 18th birthday, I compiled these journal entries into a bound book as a gift, along with photos of her growing up that I thought her mother would have wanted to see. When Ellie was applying to colleges, I was the one who drove her to campus tours, helped her edit application essays, and stayed up late researching scholarship opportunities. James attended some tours when his work schedule allowed, but the day-to-day effort of helping her prepare for her future fell to me. I didn't mind. I was proud of the young woman she was becoming and felt fulfilled in my role as her mother. The day Ellie received her college acceptance letters, James took us all out to dinner to celebrate. He made a toast to Ellie's bright future and thanked me for being the best mother Ellie could have asked for. I cried happy tears that night, believing we had successfully built a loving family despite the challenges. When Ellie decided to take a gap year after her second year of college to find herself, James was initially disappointed, but I supported her decision. I helped her find a part-time job at a local store and encouraged her to use her free time to explore interests she hadn't had time for during school. She started painting again, something she had loved as a child but abandoned in high school when academics became more demanding. Last month was Ellie's 22nd birthday. We planned a big dinner at an expensive Italian restaurant downtown that Ellie had always wanted to try. I made reservations weeks in advance to get the private dining room with the best view of the city. James insisted on inviting some of his coworkers, which seemed odd since this was a family celebration, but I didn't question it. I thought perhaps he was proud and wanted to show off our accomplished daughter. I spent weeks planning the event, ordering a custom cake with an edible image of Ellie's favorite childhood photo, and buying Ellie a silver bracelet engraved with her birth date and a small message, "To my daughter, with love forever." I wrapped it in her favorite color paper and tucked a card inside with a long message about how proud I was of the woman she had become. The day of the dinner, I picked up the cake, got my hair done, and wore the blue dress Ellie had helped me pick out during our last shopping trip together. I arrived at the restaurant early to make sure everything was perfect, the table decorations, the reserved seating arrangement, the special dessert menu I had coordinated with the chef. James and Ellie arrived together since he had picked her up from her friend's apartment where she had been getting ready. Ellie hugged me briefly but seemed distracted, checking her phone repeatedly. James was similarly distant, glancing at the door every few minutes as guests began to arrive. About 20 people attended, including my sister and her husband, some of Ellie's friends from high school and college, and several co-workers of James the first hadn't met before. One woman in particular, Laura, 35F, arrived late and made a noticeable entrance. She was wearing a form-fitting red dress and immediately scanned the room until her eyes found James. She seemed especially comfortable around him from the moment she arrived, laughing loudly at all his jokes and touching his arm several times during conversation. I noticed this but dismissed it as friendly workplace behavior, though I did wonder why I had never heard her name before if they were close colleagues. During dinner, I was seated at one end of the long table with my sister, while James sat at the other end with Laura beside him and Ellie across from them. This seating arrangement hadn't been what I planned. I had expected our family to sit together, but James had rearranged people as they arrived, claiming it would facilitate better conversation. Throughout the meal, I tried to engage with guests around me, but I kept noticing the conversation between James, Laura, and Ellie. They were sharing inside jokes and laughing in a way that made me feel oddly excluded at my own daughter's birthday celebration. After the main course, the server brought out the custom cake I had ordered. I stood up to say a few words about Ellie, reminiscing about the day I first met her and expressing how proud I was of the kind, intelligent young woman she had become. James checked his watch during my short speech, and Ellie smiled politely but seemed uncomfortable. After I sat down, Ellie stood up to make a speech of her own. She thanked her friends for coming, then thanked her father for always supporting her financially and letting her follow her dreams. I waited for her to acknowledge my role in her life. She looked directly at Laura and said, "And I want to thank Laura for making my dad happy these past 8 months. It's been so nice seeing him smile again." The table went completely silent. James's face turned red, and Laura looked down at her plate with a small, satisfied smile. I looked around confused, then back at Ellie, who continued, "I know it's been hard keeping your relationship secret, but I'm glad we don't have to pretend anymore. Laura has been like a friend to me, and I'm happy Dad has found someone who really understands him." Several guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. My sister reached for my hand under the table and squeezed it hard. I stared at James, who finally looked at me but couldn't hold my gaze. Laura reached over and squeezed his hand publicly, then raised her wine glass toward Ellie and, "Thanks." In that moment, I understood that my husband had been having an affair with this woman for 8 months, and my stepdaughter, the child I had raised and loved for 15 years, had known about it the entire time. Not only had she kept their secret, but she had chosen this public moment, a celebration I had carefully planned, to expose me to this humiliation. Without saying a word, I stood up, grabbed my purse, and walked out of the restaurant. I could hear murmurs behind me and someone calling my name, but I didn't look back. Outside and I realized I was shaking. I fumbled for my car keys as footsteps approached behind me. James called my name as he jogged across the parking lot. When he caught up to me, he grabbed my arm to stop me from getting into my car. "Let me explain, this isn't how I wanted you to find out." "How long?" I asked, pulling my arm away from him. "It doesn't matter," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Things between us haven't been right for years. You must have felt it too." 8 months, according to our daughter, I said. "Our daughter who you turned against me." James tried to explain that his relationship with Laura just happened after they worked closely on a project. He claimed they hadn't planned to fall in love but that he had been unhappy for years and didn't know how to tell me. He said Laura understood him in ways I never had and that Ellie had accepted their relationship because she saw how happy Laura made him. "I was going to tell you after Ellie's birthday," he said. "I never wanted you to find out like this." I asked him if the past 15 years had meant anything to him. He looked away and said, "You've been a good stepmother to Ellie, and I'll always be grateful for that. But Laura and we connect on a different level. She's more aligned with my goals for the future." I got into my car and drove to my sister's house that night, the gift for Ellie still in the trunk. My sister came home an hour later, bringing my coat that I had left at the restaurant and reporting that most guests had left immediately after my departure, leaving an awkward celebration that quickly dissolved. The next day, I returned home while James was at work. I packed my essential belongings, clothes, personal documents, family photos, and a few sentimental items I couldn't bear to leave behind. I noticed that some of Laura's things were already in our bedroom. I left my wedding ring on the kitchen counter with a note saying I would be filing for divorce. I didn't mention Ellie in the note. I couldn't find words to express the depth of that particular betrayal. Over the next few weeks, I stayed with my sister while finding a new apartment and meeting with a divorce lawyer. I took a leave of absence from my part-time position, unable to focus on lesson plans and student needs while my own life was in shambles. My sister helped me search for affordable apartments, and I eventually found a one-bedroom unit in a different part of town, away from the neighborhood where I might run into James or Ellie. James called and texted constantly during those weeks, alternating between apologizing for how I found out and blaming me for being emotionally unavailable during our marriage. He claimed I had been too focused on Ellie and not enough on him, that I had stopped being the woman he married, that I didn't support his career ambitions. With each message, his tone grew more accusatory, as if his affair had been my fault. I didn't respond to most of his messages, only communicating through my lawyer about practical matters related to our shared finances and the house. After a particularly nasty voicemail where he called me cold and unforgiving, I finally blocked his number. Ellie also called several times, leaving voicemails saying she was sorry but that she was just trying to support her father's happiness. In one message, she explained that Laura had confided in her first about the attraction to James, making Ellie feel special and included in an adult secret. Later messages turned defensive, with Ellie saying she didn't understand why I was overreacting and claiming that these things happen in families all the time. I didn't respond to any of her messages, unable to reconcile the daughter I raised with the young woman who had betrayed me so publicly. 3 weeks after moving out, I received a text from an unknown number. It was Ellie, texting from a friend's phone. "I need to talk to you urgently. Please. It's important." Against my better judgment and my sister's advice, I agreed to meet her at a small diner near my new apartment the following day. When I arrived at the diner, I barely recognized her. Her usually neat appearance was disheveled. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her clothes were wrinkled, her hair was unwashed and hastily pulled back, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. She was nervously shredding a paper napkin, and she burst into tears when she saw me. I sat down across from her, maintaining an emotional distance despite her obvious distress. The waitress came by, and I ordered a coffee I didn't want just to give Ellie time to compose herself. When the waitress left, Ellie wiped her eyes with the torn napkin and began speaking rapidly. Between sobs, Ellie explained that Laura had moved into our house just days after I left. She had claimed the master bedroom, replaced family photos with her own artwork, and started redecorating the living room without consulting either James or Ellie. 2 weeks later, during a dinner where Ellie was already feeling uncomfortable in what used to be her family home, Laura announced she was pregnant with James's child. According to Ellie, James had seemed shocked by the news but quickly recovered, toasting to their new beginning. After Laura went to bed that night, James had called Ellie into his home office. He told her that she needed to move out of her bedroom because they wanted to convert it into a nursery, suggesting she could take the small guest room in the basement if she wanted to stay. When Ellie protested, pointing out that the basement room had no proper windows and she had lived in her room since childhood, James told her she was an adult now and needed to support their new family. He reminded her that she had been supportive of his relationship with Laura from the beginning and questioned why she was suddenly being difficult. He said I was being selfish, Ellie told me. He said Laura needs less stress during her pregnancy, and my attitude was creating a toxic environment. Ellie had moved her essential belongings to a friend's apartment the next day, expecting it to be temporary while she found her own place. But her part-time retail job didn't provide enough income for an apartment in our expensive city, and she had missed too many shifts during this crisis. When she returned to work, her manager informed her that she had been replaced. Now she had no income, no permanent place to stay, and her friend's patience was wearing thin after a week of couch surfing. "I tried applying for other jobs," Ellie said, "but I keep breaking down during interviews. I can't focus. I can't sleep. I don't know what to do." I sat there listening to her story in disbelief, watching the tears stream down the face of the child I had raised, the young woman who now looked completely lost. After she finished speaking, I asked, "Did you know about their affair the entire time?" Ellie nodded slowly, then looked down at the table. "Laura told me first," she admitted. "She came to the store where I worked about 8 months ago. She bought me lunch and told me she and Dad had feelings for each other. She said she wanted my blessing before things got serious." Ellie went on to explain how Laura had cultivated a friendship with her, taking her shopping and buying her expensive gifts that James never could have afforded on his salary alone. Laura had told Ellie that soon they would be a real family and that I was holding her father back from true happiness. According to Laura, James had settled for me because he needed help raising Ellie, but now that Ellie was grown, he deserved a chance at true love. She made it sound romantic, Ellie said quietly. Like Dad had sacrificed his happiness for years and finally deserved something for himself. Ellie admitted she had helped them coordinate their meetings, sometimes lying to me about James's whereabouts when he was actually with Laura. She had deleted suspicious text messages from James's phone when he left it unattended and had once distracted me with a manufactured crisis about a college assignment so James could meet Laura for a weekend away. Laura said you would understand eventually, Ellie added. She said most modern families go through transitions like this, and we would all be friends someday. I took a deep breath and reminded Ellie of everything I had sacrificed for her, my career as a full-time teacher, my independence, 15 years of my life. I pointed out that I had attended every school event while James missed most of them for work. I had taught her to drive, spending hours in parking lots and on quiet streets while James claimed he didn't have the patience for it. Ellie sobbed harder with each example, nodding in acknowledgement of these shared memories. And how did you repay that devotion? I continued. You lied to my face for 8 months. You helped your father deceive me. You sat in our home, eating meals I cooked, accepting gifts I bought, all while knowing that the two people I loved most in the world were betraying me. I told Ellie that her betrayal hurt more than James's because I never expected her to be loyal to me over her biological father. I had always told her that blood connections were important and sacred. But I had treated her as my own daughter, pouring all the maternal love I had into raising her, and she had treated me as disposable, a placeholder to be discarded when no longer needed. Then I stood up, paid for my untouched coffee, and told Ellie that she had made her choice 8 months ago when she decided to help her father cheat. I would not be helping her now. But where am I supposed to go? Ellie asked, her voice rising in panic. I have nowhere to live. No job. Dad won't take my calls anymore, and Laura has changed the locks on the house. I tried to get my remaining things yesterday, and they wouldn't let me in. That's not my problem, I replied. You're an adult, Ellie. Figure it out. Ellie called after me as I walked out of the diner, crying that she had made a mistake and that James had manipulated her. She said Laura had promised they would all live together happily, that she didn't realize he would abandon her too once she was no longer useful to their narrative. Please, she sobbed as I reached the door. You're the only mother I've ever really known. I paused with my hand on the door handle. I saw not the young woman who had betrayed me, but the 7-year-old girl who had once clung to my leg during thunderstorms. Then I remembered her face as she thanked Laura at the birthday dinner, and I pushed the door open without looking back. That night, I blocked Ellie's number and all her social media accounts. I also blocked the numbers of mutual people who might try to contact me on her behalf. I changed my email address and informed my workplace that I wasn't accepting personal visitors. 2 days later, my sister told me that Ellie had posted on social media about being homeless and betrayed by her family. The post included vague references to mistakes and regrets but portrayed her as the victim of circumstances beyond her control. Several relatives have since called me, saying I'm being too harsh and that Ellie is still young and made a mistake. They say I raised her for 15 years and shouldn't abandon her now, regardless of what she did. Part of me feels terrible about Ellie's situation. She's young and her father clearly manipulated her with the help of his mistress. I know how persuasive James can be when he wants something, and how easily he can make others feel they're at fault when they oppose him. I witnessed this pattern throughout our marriage but always made excuses for him. But another part of me cannot forgive her active participation in destroying my marriage and our family. She didn't just keep their secret, she facilitated their affair, running interference and creating alibis. She watched me continue to love and care for her, knowing I was being deceived. And then she publicly humiliated me on her birthday, in front of friends and family, with what seemed like no remorse until the situation backfired on her. My sister thinks I should at least help Ellie find a place to stay or loan her money for a security deposit. She says that despite everything, I'm still the closest thing to a mother that Ellie has. But I don't think I can face her again without remembering her betrayal. So, Ida for refusing to help my stepdaughter after she helped my husband cheat on me and is now facing the consequences of her actions? Edit. Thank you all for your responses. To clarify some points people have asked about. 1. Yes, I legally adopted Ellie when she was 11, so I am technically her adoptive mother, not just her stepmother. 2. Ellie is currently taking a gap year from college. She has student loans and a small scholarship but was planning to work to save money for next year's expenses. 3. James and I do not have any biological children together. I couldn't have children due to medical issues discovered after we married. 4. The house is in both our names, but I left because I couldn't stand to be there with the memories. My lawyer is handling the division of assets. 5. Several people asked about Ellie's grandparents. James's parents passed away years ago, and his former in-laws, Ellie's maternal grandparents, moved to another country after their daughter died and have limited contact with the family. Update 1. It's been a week since I posted. My lawyer informed me that James wants to keep the house because Laura is pregnant, and he offered me a smaller settlement than what I'm entitled to. I refused his offer. Meanwhile, I learned from a mutual friend that Ellie is now staying with one of James's relatives, who reached out to her after seeing her social media posts. Update 2. 2 weeks after my original post. Yesterday, I received a handwritten letter from Ellie. She didn't ask for money or a place to stay. Instead, she wrote a detailed account of how Laura had gradually worked her way into their lives, buying Ellie gifts and acting like a friend while constantly pointing out my supposed flaws as a wife and mother. Ellie wrote that she now realizes Laura targeted her as a way to get to James, and that she deeply regrets betraying me. She ended the letter by saying she doesn't expect forgiveness but wanted me to know she understands the magnitude of her mistake. I haven't responded to the letter yet. I'm still processing everything and focusing on finalizing my divorce. My lawyer says James is now offering a more reasonable settlement since I haven't backed down. Final update, it's been a month since my original post. The divorce proceedings are moving forward. James finally agreed to a fair division of assets after my lawyer threatened to subpoena Laura for a deposition. As for Ellie, I finally called her last week after receiving a second letter. We met for lunch. Ellie apologized again and acknowledged that she can't undo the damage she caused. She's found a small apartment with a roommate and is starting a new job next week. She didn't ask me for financial help again. I told Ellie I need more time before I can consider rebuilding any kind of relationship with her. The trust we had is completely shattered, and I'm not sure if it can be repaired. However, I did give her contact information for a therapist who might help her process everything that happened. Several people have asked if I regret walking away that night at the restaurant without confronting James and Laura publicly. I don't. Maintaining my dignity was more important than creating a scene. The fact that their new happy family fell apart so quickly shows that relationships built on lies rarely last. Thank you to everyone who shared their thoughts and advice. I'm still healing, but I'm also moving forward with my life.